The 8th day of Thul-Hijjah. Pilgrimage begins from the day called Tarwiyah, that is, the 8th day of Thul-Hijjah, when a pilgrim begins his Hajj and puts on the Hajj garb in Mecca. Then he says,
اللهم حجة لا رياء فيها ولا سمعة لبيك اللهم لبيك ومحلي حيث حبستني.
That is for one who performs as mutamati, but for a mufrid and the qarin, they must have already assumed the ihram from the miqat, so he goes to Minna immediately, being in a state of ihram. The pilgrims undertake their journey after the dawn prayer in Mecca to Minna, where they pray the Zuhr prayer at its earliest time at Minna. Then they pray there the Ashr, Maghrib, and Isha prayers without a combination, but he shortens the Zuhr, Ashr, and Isha prayers. It is recommended for the pilgrim to recite labaka, etc. It is as well a sunnah to sleep the night of the 9th at Minna during the day, and if the pilgrim fails to do so, it is okay. The day of Arafah, that is, the 9th of Thul-Hijjah. The pilgrim prays the dawn prayers at Minna. It is agreeable for him to delay there till the sunrise, before proceeding to Arafat. It is a 14-kilometer trip away from Minna. It is recommended as well not to enter Arafah till the staying time in the afternoon. After praying the Zuhr and Ashr prayers in a shortened combination in the mosque of Namra, and listened as well to the preaching about the worshipful acts of Hajj and the reminiscence about God and the hereafter, also the matters concerning advice in their lives in this world and in the hereafter, delivered by the preacher, then it is sunnah to proceed straight to Arafah. The time of staying at Arafah is from the afternoon, and it finishes by the sunrise of the day of sacrifice. It is banned to move toward Muzdalifah before the sunset. The whole Arafah is a valuable location to stay in, so you can stay anywhere you want. However, it is recommended to climb the so-called Jabal Ramah. The best is the place of the Prophet, peace be upon him, at the big rocks spread out down the mountain. And the limits of Arafah are well sorted by some clear signs. Dear fellow pilgrim, you have to know that the Mosque of Namra has a portion in Orana, and the other part of it is in Arafah. It is recommended that a pilgrim supplicates many invocations. Also he has to repeat many labbaika, etc., and ask God for his forgiveness as well. He should orient himself towards the Qibla while supplicating invocations. He should not be fasting on that day. As well, he should also be purified and think about the greatness of Allah, because a pilgrim in this state is more likely to have his invocations accepted. Some mistakes on the day of Arafah. Some of the well-known mistakes of the people on the day of Arafah are struggling and suffering to climb the mountain of Ramah. This effort even distracts them from what is better than the climb, which is the invocations. Other mistakes also on that day are going beyond the limits of Arafah through Orana. This is a big mistake, because if the pilgrim continues through that, he might lose his Hajj. Because the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that Hajj is Arafah. So the pilgrim did not stay at Arafah. Other mistakes are facing toward the mountain of Ramah with invocations. The right way is that he ought to face toward the Qibla, because it is the closest for getting the invocations accepted. It is a mistake to move from Arafah before the sunset. That is a big mistake, which carries a penalty of blood. Also the right way is to move after sunset, and delay the Maghrib and Isha prayers till upon their arrival at Muzdalifah, unless there is a possibility of being delayed to say these prayers. Moving toward Muzdalifah. The pilgrim gets down from Arafah after making sure of the sunset, and postpones the Maghrib prayer with the intention of combining it with the Isha prayer, to be carried out at Muzdalifah, which is 5 kilometers away from Arafah. Then he proceeds to Muzdalifah without rushing, rather quietly. He must avoid hurting others or pushing them in the crowd. He has to supplicate many invocations, and labbaika, etc. as well, because God said, And when they arrive at Muzdalifah, it is sunnah to pray the Maghrib and Isha prayers, in combination with one call or summon for prayer and 2 iqamah. Sleeping or passing the night of Muzdalifah is among the rituals or the worshipful acts of Hajj. It is an obligation, but not a principle. Whoever fails to do it must slaughter a sacrifice of sheep to make his Hajj valid. Sleeping or passing the night at Muzdalifah should take place during the second half of the night. It is not allowed to move from Muzdalifah before midnight. He even has to stay there till he prays the dawn prayer at its earliest time. Then he proceeds towards Minna. Women and aged men are allowed to move earlier. It is a mistake to be distracted from invocations by collecting the pebbles, and to believe that the pebbles are only recommended to be collected solely in Muzdalifah. The right way is that they can be collected anywhere. The Day of Sacrifice, or the Day of the Feast. On the 10th day of Thul-Hijjah, pilgrims move to Minna, which is 9 kilometers away from Muzdalifah. They ought to say labbaika, etc., and invocations as a ritual while they are moving, and also they must avoid hurting others or crowding them. Pilgrims indeed have many duties on this day. It begins with throwing the Jumrat al-Kubra, the big one with the pebbles. It is the Jamrah which is opposite to Mecca, and while throwing the pebbles make sure it reaches the target. It is an obligation not to do it before the midnight of the Eid, and the throwing time extends till the night. It is also a sunnah to use small pebbles, in size of a bean, and he ought to say Allahu Akbar while throwing the pebbles. He has to stop labbaika, etc. by throwing the first pebble. It is allowed for sick or aged fellows to have their pebbles thrown by someone else on their behalf. Some mistakes of the throwing of pebbles. It is a mistake to perform the throwing of the Jamrah al-Aqaba before the midnight of the eve night of the feast, or throw the 3 Jamarats on the 3 days of Tashrig before the noon. During the throwing, some people believe that they are striking Satan himself, so they do it with insults and rage. That is banned for the saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Do not insult Satan, but seek refuge from Allah against his evils or harms. It is a mistake to use big pebbles, or to use shoes, or to use wood. Only small pebbles are acceptable. It is a mistake to cause harm to the crowd, because sometimes harmful actions cause the death of some pilgrims during the throwing of the pebbles. As well, it is a mistake to throw all the pebbles at once. The right way is to throw 7 pebbles. Each cast has 1 pebble. It is a mistake to have your pebbles thrown by someone else, if you are able to do it. When the pilgrim finishes this act, he proceeds to slaughter the sacrifice, and it is allowed to slaughter it anywhere at Minna. Doing it elsewhere is also okay. It is not allowed to slaughter the sacrifice before the day of the feast.